There are debts in the West that aren't paid in gold, but in a man's freedom. The wind whistled through the pine-covered hillsides, carrying the bone-chilling cold of the early snow. Jack Rowan spurred his horse toward Pine Crossing Church. This morning, he was to get married. He was throwing the rest of his life into the hands of a woman he'd never met, trading his only right of self-determination to fulfill his deceased father's dying wish. But when Jack pushed open the oak doors of the church, there was no music or welcoming smiles, only a suffocating silence. Dozens of cattle ranchers and neighboring farm owners were staring intently at him. They looked at Jack not with blessings. They looked at him with anticipation, tension, as if watching prey walk into a trap. And then the bride stepped forward. Jack had been convinced he had come here to protect a weak, resigned orphan girl. But the woman standing beneath the ivory veil did not tremble. She walked with the stillness of someone holding the power of life and death. Gently raising her calloused hands, she slowly lifted the veil. Her eyes did not seek or beg for protection. They fixed on Jack, cold, scrutinizing, and concealing a secret powerful enough to burn down the entire livelihood of this valley. Jack Rowan nodded in agreement, completely unaware of who the woman before him truly was, and what she was locking behind the gates of Stone Pine Ranch. The small chapel at Pine Crossing sat quietly among the pine trees, faintly smelling of pine resin and old candle wax. Jack noticed the atmosphere lacked the joy of a wedding. It was thick, heavy, as if everyone present was holding their breath, awaiting an omen. Then the back door creaked open. Eliza Stone stepped inside. The ivory veil, delicate as morning mist, concealed everything and nothing at the same time. She calmly approached the pulpit, her shoulders exuding a stillness not of shyness, but of astonishing self-control. When the pastor asked her to lift the veil, Jack had prepared himself for a simple, practical face, the kind of woman raised in a remote area he had imagined. But the two images didn't match. The woman before him was unlike anyone in the room had expected. Her eyes were calm, direct, and held a question he couldn't yet name. What stunned Jack wasn't just her beauty, but the way she turned, refusing to look at him a second time before the vows began. The reception was held in the open space behind the church. The older women, dressed in dark gowns, watched the newlyweds intently, their faces reflecting a preconceived notion. Jack stood at the end of the table, holding a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk. He noticed everyone was observing Eliza, not rudely, but with a certain reserve, as if they were looking at someone they weren't sure they truly knew. She moved through the crowd with a quietness that wasn't timidity. She only spoke when asked, and each time she smiled, it was a small, deliberate smile, completely different from the artificiality Jack had feared. Silas Webb, the old farm manager, approached Jack, applying the peculiar quietness of someone who had spent their life tending livestock to human interaction. "Are you all right?" Silas asked, his eyes glancing at Jack as if assessing an untamed horse. "He was Martin Stone," Silas continued, referring to her father. "He died 14 months ago. He left everything to her, every acre of land, every livestock, every bank account." Jack turned his head, stunned. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Silas picked up a piece of cornbread, examining it indifferently. "She told them not to." Jack looked at Eliza. Now he understood. This marriage wasn't just a promise between two fathers. It was a test. As the guests began to leave and the evening shadows stretched across the lawn, Jack faced his new wife. He had to ask, why did she hide her whole life from him? As the last guests departed and the evening shadows deepened on the lawn, for the first time, Jack found himself alone with his wife. They stood a silent distance apart on the ground, the last rays of sunlight painting everything around them golden. Jack looked at her, calmly but firmly. "I know nothing about your father and nothing about that land, but no one told me." Eliza turned to look at him. "I know," she replied. "I told them not to." "Why?" Jack asked. She thought for a moment, not defensively, but genuinely, as if weighing how much truth to tell. "Because I needed to know if you would come," she said. "I knew nothing for no other reason than your father's promise." Jack looked deep into her eyes. "And what if I didn't? Then I would have had my answer, and we would both have avoided much more complicated problems later," she said simply. The wind blew through the tall grass. The feeling was unlike any loneliness Jack had ever experienced. "Are you testing me?" "I was being careful," Eliza gently corrected, without a word of apology. They rode back to Stone Pine Ranch as the stars began to shine in the darkening sky. The farmhouse was larger than Jack had imagined. 2 stories, stone foundation, a wide porch encircling it. It had the sturdy appearance of a structure built to last for generations. From the stables and hay storage to the cattle herder's rest house, everything exuded the iron discipline of a constantly operating estate. Standing in the living room, Eliza bluntly set a boundary. This marriage provided her with legal protection from prying eyes, but Jack would have no right to dispose of the property or sign any documents on her behalf. Jack nodded. They entered into their life together with a harsh, clear agreement, completely devoid of trust. But that night, through a crack in the office door, Jack inadvertently witnessed a scene. Eliza was carefully locking a small safe hidden in the corner of the room. She took out the brass key, threaded it onto a chain, and concealed it deep inside her bodice. What secret was she locking away? Or was she protecting this farm from her new husband? The next morning, the fog still hung over the ponderosa pines, cold and thick. Eliza took Jack to see the ranch. They rode their horses deep north, through the sparse forest, the rhythmic sound of hooves echoing on the loose soil. The path sloped down to a narrow gorge where a swift current flowed over sharp rocks. This place was called Timber Creek Cut. "This is the lifeline of the region," Eliza said, her breath turning into white smoke in the frigid air. She explained that without this cut, the livestock would have to take a detour around the northern slopes. An extra 2 days in the freezing cold, the calves would freeze to death, the horses would be exhausted, and labor costs would eat away at all profits. Not only Stone Pine Ranch, but 3 other small ranches in the valley also relied entirely on this road, through an honorary agreement passed down from her father's time. Only then did Jack truly understand the weight on the shoulders of the woman beside him. Whoever controls Timber Creek Cut holds the lives and livelihoods of the entire community around Pine Crossing. But as they turned to leave, Jack's eyes suddenly sharpened. He reined in his horse, stopping before an old wooden marker that marked the farm's boundary. On the pillar, a remarkably fresh knife cut was deeply etched into the wood chips still damp with pine resin. Someone had secretly remeasured this area, and they weren't here to visit. 3 days after the wedding, the sound of galloping horses shattered the silence of Stone Pine Ranch. A man in his 40s dismounted leisurely. He was impeccably dressed for the dusty western landscape. His expensive wool coat was spotless. He was Pierce Dalton, a predator who didn't use a pistol, but papers, lawyers, and debts. "Eliza," Dalton said. The way he addressed her was so blunt and intimate that Jack noticed Eliza's shoulders stiffen instantly. she maintained a cold expression, refusing to return his smile. Dalton tipped his hat in congratulations on the marriage, then casually reiterated that his old business with the Stone family wasn't over yet. He represented an investment group seeking to expand a legal shipping route through the Timber Creek Cut. In reality, he wanted to take over the route, set up toll booths, and turn all the small farms in the area into debtors forced to pay tolls. Eliza coldly refused to negotiate privately. She said everything was over since her father's death. Jack silently stepped forward, standing close beside Eliza. "What kind of business is this, Mr. Dalton?" Jack's voice was calm. His hands hung loosely near his waist, an extremely relaxed posture, but one that subtly held the deadly threat of someone skilled in the use of force. Dalton narrowed his eyes. He suddenly realized this new husband wasn't the easily manipulated puppet he'd thought. But before turning to mount his horse, Dalton gave a faint smile. "The books at Town Hall don't care about loyalty or honor, Mr. Rowan. They only care whose papers are submitted first." That very afternoon, Jack, Eliza, and Silas Webb rode like the wind to the county clerk's office in Pine Crossing. The room reeked of ink, dust, and stacks of yellowed files. There, a shocking piece of news struck. Dalton had submitted a brand new land survey. He attached a legal document claiming Timber Creek Cut was a public right-of-way for commerce. He fabricated a story that Martin Stone had verbally agreed years ago to open this route to transport companies. If this document is not rejected by the deadline at the end of the week, the local authority will stamp it with approval. Eliza will still own the land, but she will completely lose control over who gets to use it. Once Dalton gained control of the livestock and goods, he would strangle Stone Pine Ranch to death. Everything had changed. This was no longer a battle of stubborn land ownership. Now they were racing against time. Eliza had to prove Dalton's survey was fake before it was too late. They galloped back to the ranch in the twilight. Eliza rushed into the office, her hands trembling as she turned the combination lock on the small safe to retrieve her father's original survey map for comparison. The lock clicked. The safe door swung open, but Eliza froze, her breath catching in her throat. The map compartment was empty. The original survey map had been stolen. Eliza stood stunned before the empty safe. But she didn't cry, nor did she panic and smash things. She bit her lip, flipping through notebooks and shaking out her father's old envelopes. Jack didn't join her in rummaging. He didn't give orders, nor did he try to comfort her with empty words. He just stood in the doorway, his voice low. "What do you need me to do?" Eliza's hand froze. She turned to look at Jack. Then, very slowly, she took off the necklace from her neck. She pulled out the tiny brass key, still warm from her skin, and placed it in Jack's palm. "There's a hidden drawer in my father's old bedroom," she said. "He kept his personal letters there." For Eliza, handing over this key was more significant than any declaration of love. She was allowing Jack into a part of her life she had locked away for over a year. They found a crumpled letter from Martin Stone. In it, he clearly stated, Dalton never loved Eliza. He only craved Timber Creek Cut. More importantly, the letter mentioned a witness named Will Crane, the surveyor who had seen Martin stamp the private boundary years ago. They immediately rode to Will Crane's wooden hut on the hill. But when they kicked open the door, the fireplace was ice cold. On the ground outside, fresh wheel tracks dug deep, leading straight towards Dalton's camp. Unable to wait, Jack and Eliza decided to find Will Crane themselves before Dalton forced him to sign the false confession. They urged their horses to take a detour north. The dense pine forest obscured the sun. A cold wind cut across the hillside, carrying thin layers of snow that clung to the rocks. In the middle of a narrow pass, they discovered a section of barbed wire fence that had been cut. Several stray calves were trembling on the edge of the cliff. Without needing any orders, Jack immediately dismounted, pulled out his pliers, and repaired the windbreak. Eliza skillfully turned the horse around and herded the calves back to safety. They worked together without much talking. Jack didn't take command. Eliza didn't stand idly by. Love in the West isn't proven by sweet words, but by mutual understanding in labor and survival. Finally, they found Will Crane huddled in an abandoned logging station. The old man, trembling, admitted Dalton's map was fake, but he sobbed, refusing to testify. Dalton held all of his family's promissory notes at the town's general store. He'd rather betray the Stones than let his wife and children starve. Eliza looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. She understood that in this remote frontier, the truth alone wasn't enough. People needed courage to survive. Will Crane hesitated, then nodded in agreement, going to retrieve the old surveying notebook hidden under the floorboards. But just as he turned his back, a sharp rifle shot ripped through the dark pine forest. The horses, panicked, neighed loudly, rearing up and snapping their reins. The rifle shots were merely a warning from the shadows, but they were enough to sow chaos. In the horses' panic, Will Crane fled into the deep woods, taking with him the Stone family's last glimmer of hope. Jack and Eliza were forced to turn their horses around and gallop madly back to Timber Creek Cut as darkness fell. But a horrifying sight awaited them. The massive pine gate, the only barrier Martin Stone had ever erected to control the cattle, was ablaze. The flames licked the night sky, burning away the last boundary between private property and the predator's ambition. If the gate were destroyed, Dalton could drive his cattle through and fabricate evidence of an unbarricaded public passage. Eliza stood motionless before the inferno. At the same time, Jack pulled out Martin Stone's old letter and reread it in the flickering firelight. His eyes froze on a line. A marriage to the Rowan family will give the farm another man on the legal documents, a shield against people like Dalton. The hurt welled up in the sullen man's eyes. He turned to Eliza, his voice choked. Was I just another legal shield for you from the beginning? Eliza didn't cry, nor did she avoid his gaze. Initially, maybe that was partly true, she said softly. But now, it's no longer the whole truth. Jack said nothing more. He turned his back and walked straight into the cold night. It wasn't that he was abandoning her. He needed some time to decide whether he would stay because of his father's promise or because of his own heart's choice. But as Jack stood silently on the hillside, his eyes narrowed. From afar, streaks of lantern light flickered toward Timber Creek Cut. Dalton was taking advantage of the darkness to herd his cattle across the cut before the deadline. Jack dashed like an arrow toward the farm, slamming open Eliza's door. Without apologies or lengthy explanations, he roared, "They're bringing the cattle across the cut!" Eliza's eyes flashed with fierce determination. She made a crazy decision. Order the winter hay storage opened. Under the freezing night sky, the cattle herders hurriedly used carts to dump tons of hay and scrap wood, blocking the narrow entrance to the ravine. They turned the livestock's food into a living wall, blocking the path of the Daltons. This was a cruel sacrifice. If a blizzard struck, losing this hay reserve would mean hundreds of Stone Pine Ranch's cattle would starve to death. Eliza was gambling the life of the entire ranch, and Jack, he was making his own choice. He strode toward the saddlebag, pulling out a thin piece of paper that held the weight of a lifetime. It was the certificate of ownership for the only barren plot of land the Rowan family had left behind. "I'll ride all night to the big town," Jack said decisively. "I'll use this as collateral to hire the best lawyer, to get an emergency injunction to overturn his case." Eliza grasped his hand, her voice trembling. "That's your family's entire inheritance. If you lose, you'll lose everything. Don't do this for me." Jack looked down at her hand, then straight into his wife's eyes. "This time, I'm not doing it for my father. I'm doing it because I chose to stand here." The eastern sky began to brighten, and amidst the ashes of the wooden gate, the old foreman, Silas Webb, dug up something with his shovel. It was a half-burned piece of goatskin map, on which a strange surveying symbol, drawn by Martin Stone himself, was faintly visible. The last day of the legal deadline. Pine Crossing was shrouded in a stifling, cold atmosphere. Horses tied along the wooden fences in front of the town hall scratched their hooves on the dry, dusty ground. Every resident, from the small farm owner to the blacksmith, stood silently watching. Today was not just the Stone family's judgment day, but the fate of the entire valley. Inside the cramped office, Pierce Dalton stood arrogantly beside the cunning lawyer from the city. He slammed a stack of files on the county clerk's desk, emphatically declaring Timber Creek Cut a public trade route, and Eliza merely a greedy woman blocking the community's interests. But Eliza wouldn't let him have his way, and she certainly didn't need Jack to argue on her behalf. She tossed onto the table her worn-out, leather-bound ledger, recording every penny paid to the gate repairman, every cow that passed through the creek, and Martin Stone's scathing letters of refusal. She emphatically argued that the small farm's access to the creek was due to personal agreements, neighborly goodwill, and absolutely not a public right. And then the door burst open. Jack Rowan entered, bringing with him the chill of a sleepless night racing against death. He slammed down the emergency prohibition order, backed by the last remaining piece of land belonging to the Rowan family, along with a report accusing Dalton of herding cattle at night to fabricate evidence. The climax was no longer a private quarrel. The entire community was witnessing firsthand who was protecting the common livelihood and who was plotting to seize it. But Dalton merely smirked. He waved his hand. From behind, Will Crane, the only surviving witness, entered, his head bowed, standing beside Dalton. He had successfully bribed the surveyor. The room fell silent. Will Crane, trembling, pulled a prepared statement from his pocket, a statement Dalton had drafted. He was about to read aloud the lie that Martin Stone had agreed to sell the route. Eliza approached Will. She neither yelled nor begged for pity. She asked a question with extreme calmness. "Mr. Crane, you personally surveyed that land with my father. Do you remember what symbol my father always used to mark his private ownership on the drawings?" Will Crane stammered. His eyes darted around frantically. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. Dalton frowned, sensing something ominous. Eliza turned to Silas Webb, taking the half-burned piece of parchment found in the ashes from the previous night, and carefully spread it flat on the wooden table. At the edge of Timber Creek, next to the surveyor's signature, 3 short, decisive black lines faintly appeared. "My father never used the diagonal symbol of public land," Eliza stated clearly. he used 3 short lines. That was Stone Pine Ranch's internal symbol for private cattle runs. The truth was as sharp as a knife. Silas and the other small ranchers immediately confirmed it in unison. The pressure of honor and the scornful gaze of the entire community crushed Will Crane's last remaining defenses. The old man slumped into his chair, covering his face and sobbing, confessing the whole truth. Dalton had seized the store and threatened his family to force him to lie. Pierce Dalton stood frozen, his face pale. He wasn't shot down by bullets, but defeated by the very weapon he revered: paperwork, witnesses, and the unity of a community. Eliza had defended her ownership rights, and Jack, he protected her without taking away her voice. They had won with a true alliance. The county clerk struck the gavel, suspending all of Dalton's files and ordering the sheriff to investigate forgery. But as the crowd dispersed, Eliza still faced a final, historic decision for Stone Pine Ranch. Would she keep Timber Creek Cut permanently closed out of fear, or open the gates to save the valley from men like Dalton? That afternoon, the cold wind still howled through the Pine Crossing Valley, but the storm in her heart had truly subsided. Returning to the porch of Stone Pine Ranch, Eliza made her final decision. She refused to sell Timber Creek Cut to any power, but she also wouldn't selfishly lock it away in suspicion and fear as she had for the past year. At the oak table, she personally drafted a new agreement with her neighbors. Small ranches were allowed to herd their cattle through the gorge during the transport months, according to a clear schedule. There would be no exorbitant toll booths, no transport companies allowed to interfere. Stone Pine Ranch retained ownership of the land, and the community retained its right to survive the winter. That was the moment Eliza not only protected her property, but officially became the true leader of the entire valley. Meanwhile, outside the gorge, Jack brought out hammers, nails, and rolls of barbed wire. Together with Silas Webb and the cattle herders, Jack personally felled ponderosa pine trees and erected a new, larger, and sturdier gate to replace the one that had been burned down. On the side of the gate, he built a small tin box, inside which he placed a ledger to record the number of cattle passing through, transparently and clearly. Eliza watched him work from a distance. Her dress was stained with mud, but her eyes shone with freedom.
Jack hadn't taken advantage of her vulnerability to seize power. He stepped back, using his rough hands to become the strongest shield protecting her land.
When the iron latch of the newly closed gate clicked shut with a dry clack, Jack smiled. He realized a truth. This gate was just like their marriage. It wasn't wide open for any intruder, but it would never again be locked shut in fear. The following spring, the thick snow began to melt on the hillsides covered with black pines. Timber Creek shed its icy cover, rushing over the cliffs, carrying the joyful cry of life back to the frontier. The first fattened cattle of the season passed through the new gate in small groups, kicking up clouds of dust in the morning sun. In the leather-bound ledger inside the tin chest, beneath the neatly arranged columns of numbers, there was now not only Eliza's signature, but also the strong handwriting of Jack Rowan. Stone Pine Ranch was no longer a solitary fortress where a woman had to struggle against the world.
Nor was it a prison where a man was held captive by the promise of his deceased father.
It had truly become a home, built with sweat, blood, and free choices after weathering the storm. In her office, Eliza neatly folded her ivory veil and tucked it away in the bottom drawer. She didn't keep it to remember the day she put her life to the test, but to remember the day she learned to let go of all doubt. Outside Timber Creek, Eliza walked to stand beside Jack. The spring breeze ruffled her bangs. Jack gazed at the sturdy wooden gate, recalling the freezing morning when he rode to the wedding, his heart heavy as a stone. That day, he had come to Pine Crossing because of a father's promise. But now, standing here beside this woman, he was making his own choice. Eliza gently slipped her hand into Jack's rough hand. The water below continued to flow. The wooden gate was wide open, not for greed or forged papers, but for those who would bet their lives on honor and love. Thank you for stopping and accompanying Jack and Eliza through the storms of the Wild West. If your heart resonates with stories of love, honor, and opportunities for a new life in remote frontiers, please click the subscribe button below. The channel's doors are always open to welcome fellow travelers. See you on our next journeys.